Dave, you know, we hear a lot about parasitism in sheep and cattle. How much of what we know about that can really be applied to the experience with deer?
There's not a lot that you're right, there's a great paucity of information with parasitism in deer, and there are some inherent dangers in just extrapolating what we know from sheep and cattle to the deer industry. The parasites are different, and there's been very little work done with deer to identify those parasites, to know which ones are in both sheep and cattle and deer, therefore how we can use those other species to help control pasture contamination. We just don't have that information at the moment. Similarly with the anthelmintics, because of the size of the industry, there's not a lot of effort being put into establishing, for example, the persistent activity of a lot of the different anthelmintics that are used for deer. I guess because we assumed in recent years that there wasn't any problem there, it's now become pretty evident in hindsight that some of the poor performance, some of the slowness of people to get animals to slaughter weights may well have in fact been influenced by what was then an unknown resistance issue.
Do you advise them as sort of a few pointers for best practice?
Well, we get a bit hung up with the drench side of the equation. We've got to realise that the management is absolutely critical, and a few basic principles there that we can extrapolate from the sheep and cattle industries that we know will have a beneficial effect is, one, using quarantine drenching for all stock coming onto the place, but it's got to be with a drench that's effective at eliminating all parasites that animals are carrying. And the second one is the principle of refugia, where the more you expose a parasite to a chemical, the more likely it is to develop a resistance. Hence, we don't want to see adult stock drenched unnecessarily. There's an easy example to use. So there's those management things. There's the way you graze your stock. Unfortunately, way too many deer farmers have adopted for want of a better word, a sheep farming mentality and a grazing stock at very low covers. We know that the level of contamination is in the lower part of the sward, so if they're going to graze it right down to covers of 1200 or thereabouts, then every mouthful is a massive mouthful of worms. Then you get onto the anthelmintic thing. We once again can extrapolate the known ways that have been used to delay the onset of resistance in particularly the sheep industry, and that's the use of combination drenches. In the deer industry, that has almost been not brought into play at all, and I mean that's vital. Even if you don't know the status of your farm, if you go to using or you think that what you're using at the moment, the pour-on for argument's sake, you think it's all right, for goodness sake, use a combination, because it will make the life of that pour-on being useful to you last that much longer in the long term. In the past, I've been very strongly against fecal egg count monitoring because of the vagaries of it. Some recent work from Colin McIntosh would indicate that it does have a place, but only in the autumn of weaner's life. Once you get into their spring, you can have a lot of animals who've got a very large burden but a zero egg output. Whereas in autumn, you will get some indication, and they can be used in two ways. One, at a 10 to 14 day interval to determine the effectiveness of the drench that you've been using, and the other at a 21 day interval to see what the level of reinfection is. Do I need, in other words, the drench interval that you can operate at. Because all these products that we're going to be using are not licensed for deer, no label claims for it, we can't safely advise. We've got to assume they've all got zero persistent activity, which may or may not be the case, in which case in the face of a heavy challenge you're having to go back to a 3-week drench interval, and nobody really wants to do that. But this year was a classic where people went beyond that, and at 4 weeks they were losing deer from lungworm.
So the farmer's a little bit worried about maybe having a bit of trouble reaching live weight targets and so on. He thinks parasitism might be a bit of a problem. First step, who should he talk to?
Well, he should talk to his veterinarian, but I would strongly advocate that his veterinarian, the first step is really to establish what the status is on your farm. You're shooting in the dark if you don't know what your status is. Admittedly, at the moment there's no easy way to do that. You've got to be prepared to spend a little bit of money and do slaughter trial on your farm to know exactly what your status is.